I came home to find my backyard completely transformed. There were strangers everywhere, cannonballing into my pool as if they were at some theme park. The air smelled like spilled beer, and floating cans lazily drifted through the water. Greasy fingerprints smeared the glass patio door, and to top it off, someone had dragged a full-size grill onto my deck, flipping ribs like this was their backyard barbecue. A group of moms lounged under my umbrella, sipping wine, clearly treating my space like it was their own. Kids screamed, splashed, and ran barefoot on my expensive tile, seemingly unaware of the mess they were making. And then, as if the universe wanted to test just how much I could take, the HOA president, Evelyn Durs, stood at the edge of my pool, megaphone in hand, announcing to the crowd, "Welcome to your new community pool." For a moment, I thought I had suffered a heat stroke-induced hallucination. My brain struggled to process what was happening. It had to be some kind of prank. But then I noticed my locked side gate wide open, its hinges twisted. A laminated sign was taped to my back fence. Community pool. Open access by HOA mandate. I clenched my jaw so hard I was certain my molars were about to crack. My feet moved forward before my brain could fully comprehend what I was about to do. I stepped over a half-eaten burger someone had abandoned on the ground and walked right up to Evelyn, who hadn't noticed me yet. "Oh, what a turnout," she beamed at a man next to her, handing him a paper cup of lemonade. "This will really boost property values." "What the hell is this?" I cut in, my voice dangerously low. Evelyn turned, blinking in mock surprise, as if I were just some random party guest instead of the owner of the property she had just invaded. "Oh, Jake, so glad you could join us." She smiled, completely unfazed. "The HOA board voted to classify your pool as a community amenity based on a bylaw from 1986. She smiled even wider, completely oblivious. "We sent a letter, but I assume it got lost in the mail." I could feel the veins in my neck pulsing, the heat of rage building up. "You didn't send a letter." "Well, it was in the monthly newsletter. Page 4 in the bottom corner," she said casually, waving her hand dismissively. "We're all so excited to have this new gathering place. Just think of the community bonding." I looked around at the scene of absolute destruction. Someone had dragged my expensive lounge chair into the pool. A toddler was standing suspiciously still in the shallow end, and my outdoor speaker system blared pop music at full volume. My jaw tightened. "Evelyn, you had no right to do this," I said, voice low, but there was an edge to it now. "This is private property, my pool, my home." Evelyn's smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew smugger. "Oh, Jake, when you bought this house, you agreed to the HOA's authority. You should have read the fine print." I had read the fine print. I had read it carefully. Unlike Evelyn, who seemed to believe she could bully her way through neighborhood decisions, I had an ace up my sleeve that she had no idea about. The problem was I had come home expecting a quiet evening, not an all-out war. I needed to get my bearings before I launched a counterattack. I exhaled slowly, then without another word, I walked toward my patio control panel. Evelyn barely registered what I was doing as she turned back to talk to another homeowner. With a quick press of a button, I shut down the pool's filtration system. Within seconds, the water turned from crystal clear to a murky green. The partygoers immediately noticed, wrinkling their noses and looking around, some of them beginning to climb out of the pool in disgust. One guy lifted his arms out of the water, staring in horror as his skin took on a slimy texture. "What's happening?" someone yelped. I leaned casually against the fence, arms crossed. "Oh, that?" That's just what happens when an unsanctioned high bacteria level event occurs in a privately maintained water source. A woman shrieked, slipping on a wet Dorito someone had crushed into the pavement, while a few guys hastily grabbed their towels and started to leave, muttering about infections. Even Evelyn's confident demeanor wavered as she watched her perfect HOA-sponsored event crumble in real time. I didn't wait for her to recover. I turned to her, speaking just loud enough for the remaining crowd to hear. "You said I should have read the fine print. Funny, because I did." I smiled, the kind of smile that made people nervous. "See, I'm the state water commissioner." The murmur that rippled through the crowd was music to my ears. Some people turned to each other in alarm, others stared at me, realization dawning on their faces. Evelyn tried to brush it off, laughing nervously. Oh, well, You illegally altered private property designation without state approval, I continued, my voice calm but firm. Not only that, but you knowingly exposed 100 people to untested, non-regulated water. I paused, savoring the moment. I have half a mind to report this to the health department right now. Evelyn's face drained of color. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. You have no idea what you've just started. Without waiting for her to respond, I walked inside and locked my doors, leaving her standing there, stunned, speechless, and for the first time, very, very worried. The next morning, I sat at my desk with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, calmly drafting my response. It wasn't going to be some angry email or a strongly worded letter. No, I was going much bigger than that. I had already done my homework. I knew exactly how to weaponize the system Evelyn had so confidently relied on for years, and I was about to make sure she'd regret every second of her HOA power trip. I sipped my coffee and carefully typed out a complaint, making sure every word was precise, official, and without emotion. The kind of complaint that would generate a case number, an investigation, and the kind of bureaucratic nightmare Evelyn wouldn't be able to ignore. It was time for the HOA to be held accountable for what it had done. By mid-morning, my paperwork had been forwarded to the Department of Public Health, the State Environmental Agency, and, just for good measure, the tax office, in case Evelyn had misallocated any HOA funds. I hit send, leaned back in my chair, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, an emergency HOA meeting had been scheduled. My phone buzzed with the notification. A grin tugged at my lips. They were scrambling, trying to figure out how to spin this disaster, but I had already made sure that the ball was in my court. The clock was ticking for Evelyn, and she had no idea just how fast it was about to run out. I made sure to get to the neighborhood clubhouse early. The place was a beige, soul-sucking building that reeked of cheap air fresheners and resentment. But it was the perfect setting for Evelyn to face the consequences of her actions. When I arrived, Evelyn was already sitting at the front, her usual smug confidence on full display. The board members were seated beside her, nodding along as she explained that a certain resident was creating unnecessary conflict. I could see the tightness in her jaw. She was nervous, and it was becoming harder for her to maintain the facade of control. I sat near the back, quietly observing as she launched into her usual spiel about neighborhood harmony, working together for the greater good of the community. It was the same tired act she had performed countless times before, pretending that this was just a minor disagreement instead of a complete debacle of her own making. I let her talk, let her believe she was still in control, and then right when she was at the height of her performance, I stood up. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Evelyn hesitated, her fake smile faltering slightly before she forced it back into place. "Jake," she said, clearly annoyed by the interruption but knowing she couldn't ignore me. "Do you have something to add?" I nodded, reaching into my bag and pulling out a thick folder. I flipped it open, holding up a document for everyone to see. "Actually, I do," I said, keeping my voice calm and collected. "Since you made my private property a public pool, I took the liberty of sending some paperwork to the relevant agencies." I flipped to another page and held it up, reading the headline aloud. "Starting today, my pool is officially declared a hazardous site due to unregulated public use. That means legally, it's closed until further notice." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Homeowners exchanged confused glances, some starting to murmur about their kids' plans for the weekend. Evelyn's smile flickered just for a moment, but she quickly regained composure. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising in pitch, clearly trying to laugh it off. "You don't have the authority to do that." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Evelyn, what's my job again?" Her jaw clenched. Silence stretched out in the room. The realization was beginning to dawn on everyone. The pieces were clicking into place, and it wasn't just Evelyn who understood the severity of the situation. It was everyone around her. Before Evelyn could recover, I flipped to another page in the folder. Oh, and since the HOA classified my pool as a community amenity, I also sent the property reclassification to the county assessor's office. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Since it's now considered public property, that means the HOA is now financially responsible for all maintenance, repairs, and liability insurance. Evelyn's face drained of color. A murmur of disbelief went through the crowd. Someone in the front row turned to their partner and whispered something urgently. A few others started to look at her with suspicion, and I could see panic starting to creep into Evelyn's carefully constructed facade. I smiled, enjoying the moment. Well, considering the cost of maintaining a public pool is pretty steep, I'd imagine your HOA dues are about to go way up. The grumbling that followed turned into outright chaos. People started shouting, demanding answers, some turning directly to Evelyn, who now looked completely out of her depth. I leaned back and waited as the room descended into confusion. But Evelyn was too busy scrambling to regain control, her voice high-pitched and shaky as she tried to dismiss the entire situation. She waved her hand, telling everyone this was just a misunderstanding. But the damage had already been done. The room was a mess of anger and frustration, and I could see that Evelyn's hold on the board was slipping fast. Someone in the back shouted that they wanted to see the HOA's financial records. Another person demanded a refund for the increased fees. I stood back and let the chaos unfold, arms crossed, savoring the sight of Evelyn's empire crumbling. She tried to regain control, but the truth was out. "Enough!" she finally snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "This meeting is adjourned. We will resolve this privately." I laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, Evelyn, nothing about this is private anymore." I turned toward the crowd, speaking loud and clear. "I'd recommend checking your HOA agreements carefully. You might be surprised what else you've been paying for." With that, I walked out of the room, leaving Evelyn standing there, flustered, while the residents began to question everything they had once believed in. I could hear the whispers and grumbles growing louder behind me. Evelyn's power was gone, and there was no putting the pieces back together. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the next morning, my inbox was flooded with messages from neighbors, some apologizing, others furious, not at me, but at Evelyn. The HOA board had gone into full damage control mode, scrambling to spin the situation and cover their tracks. But the truth was already out, and the damage was irreversible. The county assessor's office was reviewing the sudden reclassification of my pool. The health department had scheduled an inspection of all the HOA's common areas, and the state auditors were deep into investigating financial discrepancies. A perfect storm of bureaucratic red tape was on its way, and Evelyn was at the center of it all. By the time I finished my first cup of coffee, I saw Evelyn marching up my driveway, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. She didn't bother knocking. Instead, she stood at the threshold of my front porch, arms crossed, glaring at me as though I had personally orchestrated her downfall. "We need to talk," she said through gritted teeth. I took my time, savoring another sip of coffee before answering. "Do we?" Evelyn inhaled sharply, trying to keep her temper in check. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this has to stop now." I leaned against the doorframe, tilting my head slightly. "You mean enforcing the law? Holding the HOA accountable?" "That's my job, Evelyn." Her jaw clenched. "You know damn well this isn't about regulations. This is about you trying to make a point." I smiled, leaning back slightly. "Oh, I think the point has been made loud and clear." Her frustration boiled over, her face turning red with anger. "You have no idea what kind of mess you've made. People are panicking. The board is in chaos. Home values are at risk." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean your control over them is slipping?" She scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You really think you've won, don't you? You think you can just pull a few strings, make a few calls, and get rid of me?" I shrugged, savoring the finality in my own response. "Yeah." For the first time since I had met her, Evelyn looked genuinely rattled. She had built her power in this neighborhood on manipulation and intimidation. For years, no one had dared challenge her, but she had made the mistake of assuming I was just another homeowner she could push around. She had underestimated me, and now she was realizing there was no stopping what was coming for her. Just then, the sound of a car pulling up distracted us both. We turned to see two men in suits stepping out of a black sedan. One carried a clipboard, the other had a badge clipped to his belt. "State auditors," I said casually, nodding toward them. "Right on time." Evelyn's face drained of color. She looked at me one last time, her eyes full of unfiltered rage, then turned on her heel and stormed back down the driveway without another word. The auditors approached her, introducing themselves with firm handshakes and professional smiles. Evelyn barely managed to offer a polite nod before they started questioning her about the HOA's financial records. I closed the door behind me, a satisfied smirk playing on my lips. It wasn't over yet, but the walls were closing in around her, and she knew it. The days that followed only accelerated Evelyn's unraveling. The health department's inspection uncovered a series of violations: unsafe playground equipment, improperly maintained walkways, and a clubhouse bathroom that should have been condemned years ago. Residents were outraged to learn that the maintenance fees they'd been paying had never actually gone toward maintaining anything. Instead, Evelyn had been pocketing thousands in unauthorized administrative fees, overcharging homeowners for services that were either never performed or grossly inflated. By the time the financial audit was completed, the evidence was undeniable. Evelyn had mismanaged the HOA's funds, and the board could no longer protect her. At the next emergency meeting, Evelyn tried to defend herself, insisting that everything had been done in the best interest of the community. But the evidence against her was overwhelming, and the board had no choice but to remove her from her position. Legal action was soon discussed, and within days, the HOA was in full crisis mode. Evelyn fought back, threatening legal action and trying to regain control, but it was too late. The residents had seen through her, and they had no interest in backing her anymore. In the end, the HOA was dissolved entirely, and Evelyn's once loyal followers turned on her. Her house went up for sale, and rumors spread that she was leaving the state, trying to start fresh somewhere else. I didn't care to find out the details. I was too busy enjoying the peace that had returned to my neighborhood. I spent the rest of the summer enjoying my pool in peace, with no random parties, no entitled neighbors treating my backyard like their personal playground. Just me, a cold drink, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. A few weeks later, I got a call from my best friend, who told me he had just bought a new house. When I asked where, he laughed and said, "Right next door to you, Evelyn's old place. Figured I'd move in and keep an eye on things. Maybe turn it into an Airbnb." I shook my head, chuckling. "You're unbelievable." "Hey," he said, "at least I won't try to claim your pool." I laughed, feeling completely at ease for the first time since this whole ordeal began. The nightmare was over, and I had come out on top. As I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the clear blue sky, I realized something. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning, it's making sure the people who tried to screw you over know, without a doubt, that they never stood a chance. Lesson from the story. This story is a lesson in the power of patience, knowledge, and strategic action. Evelyn's arrogance and abuse of power, which she used to intimidate and control others, eventually led to her downfall. The story shows that sometimes the best way to deal with someone who abuses their position is not through confrontation and anger, but through knowledge and calculated action. By staying calm, observing the situation, and using the right tools, you can turn the tables in your favor and expose corruption or injustice without resorting to petty tactics. This is a reminder that power is not always in the hands of those who seem to hold it. It's in the hands of those who are willing to stand up for what's right.